If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword. Because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on the streets. This revolution is not about burning cars to make our demands. This revolution is about building our own cars and selling them to make money. Peace and power, freedom and decolonization to all African people from wherever you find yourself. My name is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party and the Free-Minded Pan-African Academy. As always, we greet you with our revolutionary greetings by saying that peace and love. Thank you once again for being with us on our weekly rendezvous where we talk about issues concerning African liberation and emancipation. Our main agenda is to train and produce a new class of leadership in Africa because we believe in the future of Africa, and that implies that we need to be involved in the training and the producing of the people who will handle Africa tomorrow. And that's why we say that education is the preparation of future generation. And because we believe that we have the future, our job is to create new leaders with new mindset, with new thinking, with a new way of looking at the world and looking at the reality of the world. Not leaders who are centered on the values of European society, but leaders who understand Africa from its own perspective, and then from there find the ways to engage, with the rest of the world, with the interest of Africa in the mind. So, brothers and sisters, today we want to discuss one of the important things in the African world today, currently, which is Pan-Africanism. I want us to discuss the importance of Pan-Africanism today because it is true that many people today have, varieties of ideas when it comes to Pan-Africanism. And many people also are not clear about where Pan-Africanism fits in the struggle for the African liberation. And as you can see from the title of this presentation, we have named it Pan-Africanism, the only solution for the African liberation, or the last solution, last formula for the African liberation. That's what we believe as a true Pan-Africanist. And the reality is many of our people are very much confused. They don't understand what is the importance, what is the role of Pan-Africanism. And some even despise Pan-Africanism. They believe that Pan-Africanism cannot work, has never worked, and it's kind of a fantasy or something like that, which has no substantial improvement or input to the struggle that African people are going through. Now, before we begin, I think we need to realize that any idea that has been so much fought against by the Western society will most likely be the idea that we want, the idea that we should embrace as African people. And among other things, or most importantly, the idea that has been fought against is the idea of Pan-Africanism. And that's the reason why you will see that many of our forefathers who have been put down by the Western society, by the white man, by the United States of America, by France, Germany, you call them all these Western countries. Those forefathers were mostly Pan-Africanist. When you talk about Kwame Nkrumah, you know the answer. When you talk about Thomas Sankara, he was a Pan-Africanist. When you talk about Patrice Lumumba, he was a Pan-Africanist. When you talk about Sekou Touré, he was a Pan-Africanist. All of them who were fought against, they were Pan-Africanist. And even Muammar Gaddafi, he stayed in power for decades, until he begins to show himself up as a Pan-Africanist, until he begins to deal with the issues of Pan-Africanism. Already he became a target of the Western imperialism, and he was killed. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that if democracy was meant to liberate African people truly, then the white man would have never told us about democracy. He couldn't have, he couldn't have to preach about democracy in Africa. He couldn't have to even talk about it in Africa. He was going to fight against it. And the reason why Pan-Africanism is so fought against is simply because it is the only agenda which can facilitate the liberation of African people. And mind you, in the American policy drafting, in one of their memorandum, national security memorandum, at some point they considered Pan-Africanism as threats, as a national threat, or the threat to the American interest. And they had to draft policy to undermine, to prevent Pan-Africanism from taking place between the African Americans, or the African in the America, and African on the continent, and African in the rest of the world. They had to undermine the projects of Pan-Africanism. So this is what we need to understand. If it wasn't very much important for us or for our struggle, then the white man would have never fought against it. And if they fight against it, means this is exactly what we want as African people. And that's where we need to go, even though they've been fighting our leaders to discourage us. But the point is, we have only two choices. Either we do it and we change our lives, and we don't do it and we stay in the conditions, in the suffering conditions in which we are today for maybe the rest of our lives, because it's only one way or nothing. I mean, no way at all. So that's what we need to understand. And if you know a bit about the history of, economic development or global development, or I should call it geopolitics, you will realize that since the independence, what we called independence of African countries, we have been trying different formulas. You may remember, or you may heard about industrialization. At some point, it was a policy, development policy in Africa, embraced in Africa because it was brought by the Western societies. You may have heard about economic development. You may have heard about sustainable development. You may have heard about liberalization. You may have heard about globalizations. All these have been some kind of policies of development, brought into Africa. And unfortunately, they have not succeeded. So in other words, the Westerners have brought to us fake policies which cannot help us to change our reality. And what we have always wanted is to apply Pan-Africanism. And that's what Kwame Nkrumah wanted to do in 1963. And he was actually fought against, and we know the result. And today, we have Pan-Africanists here and there trying to then bring back the very same vision that Kwame Nkrumah had, Marcus Garvey had, as we know that Kwame Nkrumah was inspired by Marcus Garvey. So that's a reality of Pan-Africanism. So in a nutshell, it's the only agenda that can free African people. Now, before I say how or why, maybe let's briefly speak about what is Pan-Africanism. There are many ways to define Pan-Africanism, but as far as we are concerned, Pan-Africanism today is actually an agenda of global unification of African people for a total liberation of Africa through scientific means. That's how we define Africa. It's the agenda that is aiming at uniting African people globally for one goal: the liberation, total liberation of Africa through scientific means. It's not through marching, through protest, or through, I don't know, burning cars or stuff like that. No, through scientific means. That is how we are going to liberate ourselves as African people and determine our future and our destiny. So basically, that's how we define Pan-Africanism, and you can understand how powerful this agenda is about uniting global Africans, those in the diaspora, those on the continent, uniting them for one agenda or for one goal, which is to work in order to achieve the total liberation of Africa. That means Africa must be totally liberated from the hegemony, from the imperialism of all our oppressors. And you know that when Africa is liberated, some of the Western or European countries will be going through a downfall, because what sustains their current standards of life today is exactly the exploitation of African people and African resources. So when we liberate Africa, they won't have access to exploit Africa through their institutions such as the World Trade Organization today. And therefore, they have to fight against this agenda. They have to fight. That's why Obama was put in power, to fight against Pan-Africanism and its rise around 2010, 2011. That is why some of the leaders in Africa that we call our presidents have been put into place to fight against the agenda of Pan-Africanism. Some of them, until today, they are there with the mission to fight to make sure that Pan-Africanism cannot succeed. And that's the reason why we have a mandate to train the young future leaders today with a different mindset, with different philosophy, with a different worldviews, so that when they grow up and when they seize the power, they have been already built with ideas or on the foundation of Pan-Africanism. And before we realize it, we will find ourselves doing things that we have always wanted to do, things that Kwame Nkrumah wanted us to do, Marcus Garvey wanted us to do. There's no better way or other way to make it happen than to really raise a new generation of future leaders with a different mindset. As Frederick Douglass said it is easy to raise strong children than to change or to correct a broken man. So that's a reality. Now, that being said, the reason why we say that Pan-Africanism is the only agenda at this moment is because when you look at it, the world today works in blocks. You see, the so-called superpower country in the world today is the United States of America, right? And the GDP of the United States of America for the year 2021, it was about for the year 2022, it was around 21 trillion US dollars. The GDP of the United States, it's around 21 trillion US dollars in the year 2022. And far below that, you had the People's Republic of China with its annual GDP about 17 trillion US dollars. So you can see that the United States is still far the strongest nation in the world. Look at the military budget of the United States of America is about 800 billion US dollars. So this superpower country that we still have up until now in the world does not, interestingly, fight alone. Have you noticed that? When America went to Iraq, it didn't go alone. It went with its allies. When America went to Afghanistan, it didn't go alone, even though it has the power and the capabilities, but it went with allies. When America went to Ukraine, as we're speaking right now, it's not there alone. It is with allies. Even in 2011, when America went to Libya to destroy Muammar Gaddafi, it didn't go alone. It went with allies. So this is the so-called superpower country in the world, which aims always to find itself in blocks with other countries, in alliance with other countries, military alliance and economic alliance with other countries. You know, we know about NATO, we know about all these multilateral organizations that America has created. You see, so what makes us think a small country such as Burundi, for example, such as Rwanda, to think that by yourself you will be able to reverse the status quo of the world, or of imperialism, of neocolonialism, and begin to emerge and achieve your goals of becoming a sustainably developed country. It is impossible. It is utopia. You see, it is utopia. Look at all the institutions that are dominating the world today. Whether you talk about the banking system, they are all working together in networks. All the banks are connected, working together. Whether you talk about, I don't know what kind of industry you can talk about, technological companies, they are all working together. Pharmaceutical companies, you find yourself, you want to go there, that they are working in a kind of network. That's why we call medical complex industry. So all these institutions that are oppressing us, all these people that are dominating us, they find a way and the means to work together to achieve the common goals, which is all about having dominion in the world. So why can't we also realize, as weak as we are, as poor as we are, economically speaking, as destroyed as we are as African people, why can't we realize that the only way forward for us is unity and organization? Unity and organization. Unity and organization. As Kwame Ture said, you organize a little, you get little done. You organize sometimes, you get things done sometimes. You don't organize at all, you get nothing done at all. But you organize always get things done. And we cannot organize until we are united as African people. So what is really preventing our mind today from realizing that the world in which we're living is actually called globalized world today, where you have blocks emerging here, BRICS, you have other blocks emerging here, Arab leagues, you have other blocks emerging there, European unions. You have different blocks working together, having military alliances in order to maintain their own freedom, because that is the only thing that can protect us. As Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Provisional President of the United States of Africa, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, said it's the only protection against injustice in man is power, whether it's military, economic, and scientific. And without the power, you always is subject of other people's domination. So why is African people, or why are African people so really reluctant to realize that our future depends on our capability of uniting ourselves and organizing ourselves for the purpose of our total liberation through scientific means, which is indeed the main idea of Pan-Africanism? Why is it so impossible for us to realize that? Should I tell you why? Because the ego that we have inherited from colonialism, to believe that it's only me or nothing, it's my way or no way, it's my solution or nobody's solution. And that is why you see a lot of small organizations mushrooming everywhere in Africa. Everybody wants to be a leader. Everybody wants other people to follow him or to follow her. Everybody believes it's only his ideas or nothing. But remember, Africa is so diverse. Africa is so, how can I put it? It's so diverse in culture, in language, in a lot of things, a lot of aspects. And there's no way that the ancestors or the divine will inspire you alone with the total blueprint of the whole solution that the entire family of Africa needs. It is impossible. It's only when we bring our diversities together. It's only when we bring our diversities together, our ideas together, we come together, we organize ourselves, that every one of us brings a kind of a, it's like a puzzle. Every one of us will bring a piece of it. And when we bring those pieces together, then we have a complete picture of what Africa must be or must do or must become for the freedom or the liberation that we are aiming for to be achieved. But divided as we are today, everyone want to be the leader. Everyone want to have what all the people to follow him. Everyone want his solution, his idea, or nobody else's idea. The whole agenda of Pan-Africanism will never gonna succeed, because if you realize in 1963, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what Europeans did to undermine the projects of African unity and African liberation, where you had different groups coming here. You had a group of Moravia, group of Casablanca. You have a lot of different groups, and all those different groups there, we had leaders that were paid by France, others paid by the CIA, to make sure that there's no success at the in Ethiopia, at Addis Ababa, at that meeting, in 1963. There's no success with the agenda that Kwame Nkrumah was actually pushing for the African unity and organization. So Pan-Africanism is the only way that we have to liberate ourselves. As I've said, you can see the world today, all the people are working in the blocks. It's only us as African people who are not finding the necessity to unite ourselves, to unite our military in order to defend ourselves, in order to guarantee our protection. As I've just said, the only injustice in us, the only protection against injustice in our lives is nothing else but power. And to build this power, we need to be able to abandon our fake nationalism and create a continental military alliance that will be able to protect us as African people. When you look at it closely, you will see that we are spending a lot of money diversely for what we believe to be our military defense. And you may wonder, there's no history of wars in Africa as it was in Europe. Because when you see in Europe, each European country want to strengthen its military position, and that's understandable, even though they have European Union. But it's understandable because Europe has been through the history of war, of savage. For centuries, they have been fighting against each other, killing against each other in a way that you cannot understand. The ancestors of Europeans, if they know the Europe of today, they are surprised in their graves because of what they knew about Europe. It was about war. So this mentality of warfare, it can justify the tendency of equipping themselves individually with weapons. But we see that Africans, we're trying to imitate them, even though we don't have the same history of warfare among ourselves. Why do we spend so much of our little or our meager economies to buy individual weapons, guns that have been already written off in Europe to protect ourselves? To protect ourselves against who? You see, there's no history of warfare between, for example, Nigeria and Ghana. There's no history of wars of extermination between, Nigeria and Ivory Coast, or between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, yes, or between Zimbabwe and South Africa, or between Zimbabwe and Zambia, or between Tanzania and Zambia. So why do we invest so much of our meager economies to buy all these weapons that we cannot even use against our true oppressors? Simply because we have been indoctrinated to be clients. We have bought in that culture of clientelism, to buy everything that Europeans push us to buy. And simply because it's sad that I should say it, simply because our main goals as African people is to transform ourselves into little British, little Portuguese, or little French, according to or depending on who colonized you. So for us to fit in that category of little British, little Portuguese, or little Belgium, we need to buy all these written off weapons that these people manufacture so that we can eventually emulate their image, which is impossible. So that's reality. I mean, that's what drives Africa. That's the mindset of today. But again, we need to realize it's only Pan-Africanism. And this new Pan-Africanism implies that we need to give up on our fake nationalism or nationalities that have been created for us by our oppressors and embrace the African nationalism. African nationalism. We need to abandon our fake nationalism of I'm a Congolese, I'm a Nigerian, or I'm a Ghanaian, I'm this and that. All these terms, all these emblems have been created by your oppressor and my oppressor for the sole purpose of keeping us under their domination. And we need to be able to embrace our African nationalism. And through that, we'll be able to build Africa as a global power base. And that is the essence of unity. You see, we have a lot of Pan-Africanists today who talk about unity without even analyzing the essence of unity. You see, when we talk about unity here, we don't mean the mere fact of saying that let us unite and Africa will be better tomorrow. We don't even see, first of all, the dismantling of the borders that we have inherited from colonialism, even though it is a very necessary step, but it is not the first thing that we need to do. Because, mind you, we can destroy all the borders today, and tomorrow we won't have employment in Africa. We won't have economy in Africa. We won't have what we call quote-unquote development or liberation in Africa. You see, because the most important borders that we have to deal with today are the one that we have in our mind, psychological borders. When you see another African, you begin by judging him by the accent of his English or of his French or his language that he speaks. And when you sense that, okay, this accent is Nigerian, you begin to treat him the way that you know how Nigerians are treated. Or if you sense that, okay, this is a Ghanaian or this is Ethiopian, you begin to discriminate against them. So this is psychological. So the physical borders are not even important. So the unity that we're talking about here in our context is African Continental Unity Party implies that unity of objectives, unity of goals. You see, if you see a bunch of dogs, scattered all over, you want to bring them together. What do? You throw a meat or a bone in the middle of them, and they will all come together around that meat. And that's how you create unity that's how you unite those things. It's the same thing with us as African people, scattered as we are. What we need to do is to create common goals. What is our common military goal? What is our common scientific goals? You see, it is a good thing in 2000. That's a good thing that happened in 2018 that we had what is called the African Continental Free Trade, right? Which was, I think, signed in Rwanda. It was a good thing. It was a good economic goal. But does it have some kind of institutional basis behind it to make sure that it is being really enforced? It's not just a symbol that has no substance. Is there any actions that have been correctly and pragmatically implemented to make it happening? And even before we talk about economic free trade, or as it was called, do we have the military capacity to protect our economy? Because, as I said, it's only the military power which protects us against injustices, whether it's economic injustices or whatsoever. So you see, we are really not considering what is the most important thing as a Pan-Africanist. So when we talk about unity, we see first of all the common goals that we have to establish as African people, and let each one of us begin to work towards those goals, right? Whether you are in Senegal, whether you are in Guinea, whether you are in Kenya, whether you are in Tanzania, whether you are in the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, let us work for these common goals. And the moment that we begin to, all of us collectively, work for these goals, we'll find ourselves united. It's not just about sitting together, coming together physically and then speaking about Africa, making all these big speeches which have no actions behind them. No, let us choose the goals, and each one of us from where we are work toward those goals, and that's how we find ourselves united. It's a unity of actions. It's not just unity of speech that we're talking about. It's unity of actions, unity of mindset, unity of actions, and unity of goals, which will change Africa. Let me give you an example. Let's say we give ourselves an objective: no more dumping garbage on streets in Africa, because I'm saying that when you go through different countries in Africa, you see that people have habit of just dumping garbage on streets, right? Let's say that for 1 month, nobody dumps garbage on streets. It's just an example. Everyone must find a designated area where we have to dump our garbage, dump our dirty stuff in a dustbin, right? And if we see somebody dumping stuff on the streets, we as a community must force him to clean the whole street as a punishment. So let us keep our streets clean. Wake up in the morning, sweep the street, clean the street in our communities. Make our communities clean. For example, if we do it in Angola, we do it in South Africa, we do it in Zimbabwe, we do it in Congo, we do it in a month, we'll see Africa totally different. And we see Africa totally clean. Is an example. And it's the same thing we can do, economically. We have to have common goals. Militarily, common goals. Bring our military budgets together and build, instead of our individual colonial enclosures military budgets or military defense, we build a continental military defense. By bringing our military budgets together, we'll be able to protect ourselves. We'll be able to defend ourselves against our oppressors. This is how we will achieve the unity that the current Pan-Africanism speaks about. So, if you are an aspiring leader, you may find this presentation necessary, especially when it comes to the topic of Pan-Africanism, to realize that Pan-Africanism is the only agenda that we can put in place, is the only formula that we have in order to liberate ourselves as African people. There's no another formula that will come from the European mindset that will set Africa free. Because Europeans know themselves that African freed is European in demise. So they have to do all the most dominant mindset or thought which they have in mind is on how to keep our domination over African people. So for us, we need to think for ourselves. And it's only Pan-Africanism at this stage which is potentially going to liberate us as African people. And this Pan-Africanism must be achieved through scientific means, not through haphazard actions, but it's going to be through scientific means. And it requires that all of us as African people should unite and should organize. And I've explained what unity implies. So if you are an aspiring leader and you have a chance to go into our public institutions, you need to know exactly what kind of policy you can push in order to achieve this unity that we're talking about. And if we do it in our respective countries, unity will automatically put itself in place. An organization we are talking about will be created and Africa will be liberated. If you are in Angola, you're pushing policies that are aiming at creating unity and organization of Africa, and other people in Nigeria, Ghana, we do that because the reality is we know already. In most cases, we know what we need to do to free ourselves. But the problem is we are still being actually taken by that dynamic of neocolonialism, or that inertia of neocolonialism, of imperialism, that prevents us from looking on the right direction of Pan-Africanism and imply or apply the solutions that Pan-Africanism suggests to us. I hope this presentation was useful to you, and if it was, please kindly like the video, share the video, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. Thank you very much for your patience and for being with us. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on the streets, it's in the mind. Because if we are not in charge of our mind, our bodies will be the tools that our enemies will use to oppress us and to oppress our people. Peace and power, freedom and decolonization to all African people. We thank you and we see you next time. Peace and love.